Welcome. I started writing this talk and I entitled it, I started out calling it Unsung Hero. Then I thought that's not quite right. So I changed it to An Accidental Hero. But don't write that down because it's changed again, and I'll tell you what the title is when we get to the end. But that'll do for the time being. And the inspiration for this talk came last weekend. The first thing was a testimony from the prayer and fast, where a sister told us about an almost casual invitation to the barbecue on the Monday after convention some years ago, and then the resulting sequence of people coming to the Lord as a result of that. Our sister didn't set out to do anything except invite this lady who she knew to a relatively low-key function. The result was she ended up telling her story to the audience at the prayer and fast. The second thing that happened was on Sunday, Kevin was talking about a young man in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I'd never read that verse or two before, or if I had, it had gone in one eye and out the other. So let's have a look at that. Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14, and we'll start in verse 50, and it says, "And they all forsook him." They'd just taken Jesus. This is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the priest or the gang of thugs that he'd put together had just taken Jesus, or just captured him, and it says, "They all forsook him and fled. And there followed him a certain young man, having a linen cloth cast about his naked body. And the young men laid hold on him, and he left the linen cloth and fled away from them naked." And that's all there is. This young man got set to or set upon by the crowd and disappeared. As far as we can tell, nobody else was taken. None of the disciples were arrested or anything else. Just this bloke. It's the only one that we can find recorded. So why did they pick on him? Maybe he gave them some cheek. Would seem to be quite a possibility. Maybe he was just young and a bit smaller and therefore fair game for a bunch of bullies. Plausible as well. Whatever it was, he ended up in the Bible. No name, no other information, but 2,000 years later, we're reading about him. He's famous, some sort of hero. Ordinary people doing ordinary things, but with unexpected outcomes. There's a few characters like that in the Bible, so we have a look at some of these people that come in and then disappear completely off out of the story, but they're there. One very obvious one that we're probably quite familiar with is in 2 Kings. In chapter 5, I suspect most of us will have read this story at some stage or another. Chapter 5 of 2 Kings, starting verse 1. "Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and honourable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. And he was also a mighty man in valour, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. And one went in and told his lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid, that is of the land of Israel. So we've got this little maid, it's a captive, probably a slave, probably pretty scared. She would have been taken away from her family, possibly didn't know what had happened to her family. She didn't set out to be famous. But many people who've read the Bible know about her. She just wanted to help her mistress's husband. She cared for other people. Despite her treatment and captivity, she could have not said anything, but she spoke up. Maybe she just wanted to make the best of a difficult situation. Again, we don't know her name. She doesn't appear again. But she's in the Bible and we read about her 2,000 years later. And she's been read about ever since. John chapter 6. John chapter 6 and verse 5. John 6 verse 5. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he said unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread that these may eat? This he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pennyworth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, There is a lad here which has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, but what are they among so many? And Jesus said, Make the men sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. What about the lad? Who was this lad? His mum had given him his packed lunch, sent him off, probably told him to be home before dark. We don't know. Pure supposition. There is a lad here. That's it. That's all we know about him, except that he had 5 loaves and 2 fish. But he must have been close to the action. He must have been up near the disciples and Jesus, keen to see and hear what Jesus was talking about. Quite likely he heard them discussing about the feeding of the multitude and tried to help by offering his lunch. Little did he know. It was a selfless act. He gave up his meal. And as a result of that, 5,000 plus were fed. We don't know his name. We don't know anything else about him. But here he is, 2,000 years later. Mark chapter 12. Verse 41. Mark 12, verse 41. And Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow has cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. A certain poor widow, she just wanted to make her offering to the Lord. She probably didn't even know that Jesus was watching. And yet again, here she is, 2,000 years later. We don't know what became of her, don't know anything about her, except she put what she had into the treasury. Finally, there's an example where we actually know this bloke's name. Acts chapter 20. Acts chapter 20 and verse 7. And upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued his speech until midnight. And there were many lights in the upper chamber where they were gathered together, and there sat in a window a certain young man named Eutychus, being fallen into a deep sleep. And as Paul was long preaching, he sunk down with sleep and fell down from the third loft and was taken up dead. And Paul went down and fell on him, and embracing him said, Trouble not yourselves, for his life is in him. There's another guy. He's not mentioned again. You won't find Eutychus anywhere else in the Bible. But he was there listening to Paul preaching. Make no comment on the fact that he fell asleep, but he managed to. But we don't know any more about him. Ordinary people doing fairly ordinary things. And they're in here. 2,000 years later, we know about them. They all came to fame. They all ended up in here accidentally. None of them got up in the morning and said, I'm going to go out and get into the Bible. Nothing like that. They were just going about their daily business. We don't know a lot about Eutychus, but all the others were pretty humble about the way they were going about things. They weren't putting themselves out there. But there's an element of confidence in each one of them, how they dealt with it. And it's interesting that that's pretty much the definition of meekness. Meekness is the opposite of self-assertive or self-interest. The dictionary definition says it's the mental calmness of spirit that is neither elated nor cast down, simply because it is not occupied with self at all. Not occupied with self at all. That's what meekness is. In Matthew 5 verse 5, Jesus said, Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. These guys didn't inherit the earth, as far as we know, they haven't yet, but they're in here. In Matthew 11, Jesus describes himself as meek. Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus said he was meek. Now in English, meekness is often associated with weakness. Someone who can't help themselves might be described as meek. We talk about an animal on a lead following meekly behind. There's this element of helplessness associated with what we often think about as meekness. But the Greek word means something different. It means more, gentleness is part of what it means. It's an attitude, not something imposed on someone. Jesus was quite different from this idea of helplessness. He had power. He was humble, very, very humble, but he had amazing power and confidence. If we go to Matthew chapter 27, we can see this demonstrated. Matthew 27 and verse 11. So this is Jesus after he'd been captured. And remember that he knows what's about to happen. He knows what's facing him. He's got all of that pressure on him. In verse 11, and Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, Art thou the King of the Jews? And Jesus said to him, Thou sayest. And when he was accused of the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Then said Pilate unto him, Hearest thou not how many things they witnessed against thee? And he answered him to never a word, insomuch that the governor marvelled greatly. This is a demonstration of confidence and power, but in humility. His attitude and his bearing said, You can't touch me emotionally. Your words can't get to me. He's sort of saying, You think you're in control here. I've got the power. I am letting you do this. But he didn't lord it over them. This is meekness, born of power and confidence. Not weakness and helplessness, but power. This is genuine meekness. Humility with confidence. Our accidental heroes didn't have much power, but they did have confidence, and they had humility. They were meek. We go to 2 Timothy chapter 2. Second Timothy chapter 2, verse 24. And the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle unto all men, apt to teach, patient, in meekness, instructing those that oppose themselves, if God peradventure will give them repentance to the acknowledging of the truth, and that they may recover themselves out of the snare of the devil, who are taken captive by him at his will. This sort of meekness isn't the animal following weakly behind, but it does fit the image of Jesus and confident humility. There's gentleness and patience when we're leading someone, trying to convince someone that they need to change their life. They need to come and accept what God's offering. And that gentleness and patience comes from knowing that the power that we have is greater than the power or the force that the people we're speaking to might have. It's not brash confidence of natural rank or status, possibly a bully. It's nothing like that. It's one of care, concern, with authority and power, though, standing on what's in the Bible. This concept's used a number of times in the Bible. If we go to James chapter 3. James chapter 3 and verse 13. Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show, out of a good conversation or a good life, his works with meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descends not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. That's the bitter envying and strife. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated or able to be persuaded, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. So in verse 13 it talks about this meekness of wisdom. And I've just lost it. Again, this implies power and strength. And the Amplified Bible uses the phrase unobtrusive humility, which is the proper attribute of true wisdom. If you have the wisdom of the Bible, then verse 17, and I've just turned the page over and lost it. Chapter 3, verse 17, there we go. Verse 17 describes your character: peaceable, gentle, easy to be dealt with, not prickly or grumpy, full of mercy and good fruits, the fruit of the Spirit, without partiality and without hypocrisy. That's the meekness of wisdom. So our accidental heroes wanted to help others. They didn't seek fame or notoriety and probably didn't get any in their own lives. Well, who are you? Oh, I'm the guy that gave Jesus 5 loaves and 3 fishes. Oh yeah, terrific. I'm the guy that fell out of the window. They are not getting notoriety. And we need to take those characteristics on board. We need to be humble, not blowing our own trumpets, helping others without expecting reward, but all the time confident of our position with the Lord, Spirit-filled sons and daughters of the living God. That's something to blow your trumpet about. That's something to go out and make a fuss about. But that's not being humble. That's not what Jesus did. He could have called 10,000 angels, and so it goes on. But he didn't. He stood there. So we've got a certain sister witnessing, a certain young man accompanying Jesus, a little maid taken prisoner, a lad which had 5 barley loaves and 2 small fishes, a certain poor widow, a certain young man named Eutychus. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. Notice that word certain turns up a lot in there. A certain man, a certain this, a certain that. The Greek word means any, some, and basically you can leave it out in the English what the Greek word means. It doesn't, it's not too important. In English, there are 2 meanings for certain. One is similar to the Greek one, specific but not explicitly named or stated. The exercise was causing him a certain amount of pain. Sort of amorphic. You could almost leave the word out. And that's what the Bible means when it talks about a certain young man or something. The other meaning of certain is able to be firmly relied on to happen or be the case. Something is true, something is real, something is certain. And the dictionary says unquestionable, sure, definite, beyond doubt. I'd like to take some liberty with the idea of a certain young man, a certain thing. We've said that these people were humble. I'd suggest that they were also certain of their God, certain of their picture, their position with God. That gave them the confidence to in fact be meek. Remember the definition, mental calmness that is neither elated nor cast down, simply because it is not occupied with self at all. And Jesus said, blessed are the meek. So instead of accidental heroes, I'd like to call this talk certain hero, or certain people. Certain in both senses of the word. Certain because they were ordinary, everyday people doing everyday things. Certain because they knew their position with God. So to slightly misquote Matthew 5, verse 5, we are the meek, for we shall inherit the earth. We can be certain of that. We are certain people. We're humble. We know our position with God. We're sons and daughters of the living God. We have His Spirit within us and He works in our lives. We are certain people.